you're on now. Okay. Go ahead.
I started to ask you, you said you don't think that a tape exists of that at all.
Well, some kiddies must exist because every once in a while you see a documentary about the blacklisting period, especially of hearings. They took place in Washington, D.C. And you see people, from the Hollywood 10 screaming.
Was that where his took place
No,
too?
no, his took place in Hollywood. They were scratching the bottom of the barrel when they got to Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was not an important person in the scheme. He wasn't important in the scheme of Hollywood anyway.
Right.
In the European community, among the Viennese and German writers and artists, he was a well-known and beloved person. I mean, not a bad cast of characters when you think of Leon Furtwängler and Thomas Mann, and therefore moved to South America very soon. Bertolt Brecht, John Wingate, you just name them, and so of course Alcafer. That whole very cultured, very European, very Bruno Walter, with whom he collaborated, Bruno Frank is with whom he collaborated with. Bruno Walter, who, by the way, made a remark about David was not 3 years old. We were driving along one day, and over the radio, he heard Appalachian Spring, the composer. He just
Copeland. Copeland.
Yeah, just died recently. And he said, little David said, "That's pretty noise, but I don't like it. It's all uphill." Isn't that lovely? So that night, Michelle happened to be having coffee with Bruno Walter, and he told her the story. He said, "The boy's a musical genius," because he hated Copeland. He couldn't stand Copeland's music.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Do you have any tape recordings of Michelle?
No. I remember Stringfellow Bard trying to make me get Oak to record something, poetry, reading poetry. She had a wonderful, deep voice, wonderful voice.
Who was Oak?
Oak is his wife,
Oh.
Josephine. They
I
called
see.
her Oak. Such stories as I can tell you about her. Incredible lady. In fact, the fact that Winky wanted to marry me so badly is the greatest compliment of my whole life, that he would even think of me after Oak, Oh, splendid lady. And I tried every which way to get her to read for me, because Winky said to me, Oak was much older than me. She was about 10, 15 years older than he was. And he said, if she goes first, it'll be such a comfort to me to listen to her voice. And I thought to myself, what a comfort it would be if I had something of Michelle's that I could hear.
So there, as far as you know, there is nothing that would exist.
And what I found so curious, the Baravellis, who live up in British Columbia, Jesse and I visited them
Yes,
last
yes.
summer. Barry said to Michelle, be prepared for the fact that they'll do things to mock your accent. Don't let them throw you. What accent? But like the woman who said to me one time, I'd love to listen to your husband talk. He sounds just like Charles Boyer. What accent? Well, by God, if they didn't make him repeat words because they didn't understand what he was saying. And I didn't understand that, so I'd love to hear it. I would love to hear the sound of his voice.
But as far as you can tell, there is no avenue to explore that.
No, I don't know of any. I don't think that they kept... there were no such things as rebroadcast, for example. I think it was all live broadcast. I don't think it was photographed. I don't think there were any kiddies.
Does David remember his father talking, the sound of his voice
I
and all?
don't think so. I don't think so. Every once in a while he comes up with a memory about Daddy that surprises me, given the fact that he says he doesn't remember certain things. He'll tell a nice story or he'll laugh about something.
How old was he when his father died?
Almost 9. And
His brother was how old?
almost 6. Tony says he doesn't remember anything about his father. But he also comes up with a memory every once in a while and chuckles. Or I'll tell a story about Michelle sometime, and he'll say, oh, that's one I haven't heard, Well, I've told a lot of stories about him to the boys, but they every once in a while come up with something. I hear David say to the kids, "Your grandfather taught me," and he'll say what it was, you know. So they do remember, but not too well.
9 years old. What did
Yeah.
Tell me what your mother thought about you going to law school.
Well, I once went up on an investigation, and this will tell you. I went on an investigation, and whenever I had a long trip to make, I took Mama with me because she was left alone in the apartment all the time, and she always complained about being alone, although she lived in a place where they had activities, but always complained about being alone. And I once took her up to Mendocino, for example, once to Eureka, and I'd leave her in the motel. I'd go out and make my investigation or hold my election, and I'd come back. She'd have that nice long drive with me, and it would be pleasant for her. So this time I took her up to some place in Santa Rosa, and I forgot which union it was, but I had to take an affidavit, and I didn't realize it was going to be one great big room with just little petitions, but they didn't go up to the ceiling. They were just maybe 5 feet high to separate typewriter desks and things like this. And I'm taking this affidavit, and I hear my mother say, "I tell you, I don't know what happened. What she did to herself. She goes to law school. What she did to herself, you wouldn't believe it." What she did to herself.
Who was she talking to?
She was talking to the secretary out there. When I'd say, you should tell her that I had become a lawyer recently. She said, you don't know what she put me through, what she did to herself. So that's when my mother thought about going to law school.
But she was up here too after the beginning of that first year.
After the first semester. After the first semester, when she came up to help me in the week of the first finals.
Were both boys here eventually during law school?
David was here, and Tony, before I even got up here, they worked all summer to put this house in order. And then Tony went back to Brandeis. No, but Tony went back to Brandeis and waited, took a job working with a Catholic organization taking care of retarded children and doing carpentry, because Tony showed a gift for the law from the time he was a little kid. I mean, one of the things, continuing arguments that I had with him was, "You're not Clarence Darrow yet," because he always had an argument. He always had an argument about something, and he could beat me down in an argument. And my final refuge was to say, "You're not Clarence Darrow yet." But I always thought he should be a lawyer, and I used to encourage it. He said he didn't want that. So he waited until I was already in my second year of law school, I was beginning the second semester of law school, to announce that he was going to go to law school. And the reason he waited for a year and a half was because he knew, or thought he knew, and probably he was right, that if he announced at the beginning, which is when he had decided to go to law school, if when I started law school, I knew that he was going to start law school, he thought I would go back to the center, where I had an open invitation to return. He thought that I would go back in order to give him the money to go to law school, so he waited to be sure that I wouldn't do that.
But how were they about your decision to go to law school? Were both boys all very supportive?
Very supportive, and they had to teach me how to take an exam. It was clear that I didn't know how to take an exam. And they helped me prepare for the LSAT. They helped me with the arithmetic. They caught on very quickly to the fact that I didn't know how to go about taking an exam. They were very helpful and very encouraging in that. And one nice story is that when I did take the bar, as I told you, I had to take it standing up, and the boys built me a pulpit-like thing for the 2 typewriters so that I could type my exam as well. And when he went to New College here, so he was here for a while. He went to New College for the first 2 years, I think, and the third year he completed at Northeastern, back east. And because he had then met Carol Lee. And one day the kids were complaining about the burden of work that they were getting, the assignments, and the teacher, who was a young man, and I've forgotten his name, was very irritable and said, that they didn't know anything about spunk or hard work. He had a student back in San Francisco who was old, who had back surgery, and who, then he described what happened when she took the exam, and then he looked at Tony and said, I fail to understand what you find so amusing about that, because Tony was laughing his head off.
That is wonderful.
And Tony said, well, that student you mentioned happens to be my mother, and I'm the one who built that thing for her typewriter so she can stand up and type. Small world apartment.
Small world apartment.
Yeah.
Really. Tell me about, again, you've told me a little bit about it, but I really don't know the sequence. You were in Mineola. Tell me when you first came out to the West Coast. Where did you come?
I'd always wanted to travel, of course. But I had an incident. All my life, I've had the most horrendous stomach aches. Sometimes I would be bent over, be unable to walk.
Tension?
And I just lived with that. I always had stomach aches. I was always being taken to doctors, and they were fluoroscoping me and saying that I had big gas bubbles, which had pushed my heart over to the right. I don't know what kind of crap. But one time I had a very bad attack, and I couldn't walk, and they sent me to Bellevue by ambulance because I couldn't walk. It was down near City Hall. It was outside the Center Building, which was a state office building in New York City, right across the street from that great big courthouse that you very often see in documentaries or films. And the snotty intern there said, where do the pains start? They start here and work around here. They start here, move around here. Well, I can't remember pain to this day. I can't describe the path of pain. I just can't. And there are reasons for that, too, that I understand, but I can't solve it. And then he finally said, well, it can't be all that bad if you don't even know where they come from. And I said, well, they were bad enough so I couldn't walk across the street. And he began to ask questions, and I thought, really, he's dumb, he's arrogant. Who do you eat with? Who in the family sits around the table? What kinds of things do you talk about? And he elicited from me a lifelong story of waiting for Papa to get home, because that's when Mama announced all the transgressions. When I was a little kid, I used to say to my mother, I don't feel well, I'm sleepy, I want to go to sleep. And she'd say, oh no, you feel all right, you just don't want to talk to Papa. Because I would...
For the discipline.
We used to, he would talk and lecture, and you'd hear about the bagel. I went to work with a bagel in his pocket so he wouldn't have to go to the restaurant, so there would be money enough for us to eat. And Mama would sit, he would ask, have you been a good girl today? And earlier my mother would have said, you don't have to tell Papa you were fresh. I won't tell Papa you were fresh. You could tell Papa you were a good girl. And he said, were you a good girl today? And I start to nod my head, and then I cry and say, no, I was fresh to Mama. And then I would have to tell what I did, and then I would get the lecture. And, I used to think, kill me, beat me up, but don't lecture, don't talk anymore. So this doctor elicited from me a picture of the evening meal being a place where all the complaints against whoever it was, were being heard, and where you got the lectures. In addition to which, your father was drinking, and you watched that little golden line go down, 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 because at one point, the talking was incessant, and the lectures got, that's when he would say, swear to me on your soul that you're going to practice you're down on the east side 2 days a week for nothing, and so this guy elicited this pattern of associating food with tension, so that I didn't have to have anybody lecturing to me anymore. All I had to do was to be eating. And he said, if you want to live another 5 years, get yourself out of your house and get away from home. Well, again, how do you get away from home? You have sinus. You have terrible sinus attacks, which were legitimate. I did have them. And the doctor says you better go to California and live there, right?
How old were you at this point?
Well, at the point that I managed it, I was 23. So for a couple of years, I was planning it.
Living at home.
And then Betty and I, Betty was a gal I worked with in a state office building. We planned a trip through the Panama Canal by boat. And it was a 2-week trip to get to Long Beach, California. And we decided that if we could get a job within 3 months, we would stay in California. And that way I could leave home. Of course I couldn't. My mother did not follow first. First came my sister. Then came my father. Then came my mother and my other sister.
All relocating out there?
But by that time I was no longer living at home. So at least, in those days, Ronnie, you didn't go and find your own place. The fact that
Absolutely.
you were 23 years old
Meant nothing.
No, you didn't leave your home until you were married, and sometimes not even then. Depends on how big the house was.
So you and Betty came out to Long Beach?
That's right.
And then
At
what?
Long Beach, we got, I think the steamship company took us into Los Angeles by bus. And
No job at that point?
no, I got a job within 2 weeks. We started looking for work immediately. When I came to Los Angeles, every other building advertised a high colonic or a psychic reading. Really. And the palm trees seemed so exotic to me. Everything seemed exotic to me. I remembered I had been working for a man in the insurance department of the state of New York, and he said to me, in California, the roses don't smell, the oranges don't taste, and the people's smiles don't mean a thing. And
Was he right?
Yeah, largely. But we wound up renting an apartment on Bonnie Bray, just because the name was so beautiful.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
This is in Los Angeles?
In Los Angeles, and then we began looking for a job independently. And that's when I ran into all these anti-Semitic experiences. Like, since I had worked at the Public Service Commission, I tried the utility company first, since I knew the vocabulary well, and the insurance companies. I was asked questions like, what's going on? Are all the heaves emptying out of New York? Or are you Jewish? We don't take Jews.
What was your maiden name?
Davidson.
Davidson.
And so that when I was sent out to Warner Brothers, just on a day job, they wanted somebody for 3 days. Robertson White, who used to be with Don Amici in a living radio theater, they did a lot of extemporaneous stuff. And 20th brought out Don Amici first, and Don Amici brought out Robertson White, and Robertson White brought out Beverly Latham. They kind of passed down the good luck to people they knew. Robertson White was asked by Harry Maeslish, who was the manager of the radio station, Warner Brothers Broadcasting Company. They bought a radio station as a memorial to Major Albert Warner, who believed that radio was the communication of the future. And he believed in radio, so they bought the station. And Maeslish was allowed, in fact, they had the most wonderful programs that originated there. The most wonderful programs, but he didn't have to run in the black. For about 3 years, we ran in the red as a prestige, a monument. Then we began to sell spots because overnight they decided that enough was enough with the honors. But at the time that I went, he wanted to make that into a top radio station. And he asked Robertson White, with all that experience from Chicago, to come out to the radio station. And White said he couldn't work with these California gals. That wasn't the expression then about being laid back. But he said they couldn't stand their pace. He said to the agency, get me a nervous New York woman. He only said girl. Get me a nervous New York girl. So they sent me out. And I sat there waiting for an hour and a half while he was in a meeting, and he came out and he said, how do you do, Miss Davidson? And he looked at me and said, are you Jewish? And I picked up a book. And didn't I tell you the story?
No.
Yeah, I picked up a book and he said, don't throw it over here, it helps. And then he said,
This is Maeslick speaking?
no, this is Robertson White. And he said, have you been having a rough time? So I told him about the experiences, including one where we took an apartment because the Bonnie Bray place didn't have a kitchen. We had to eat our meals out. And we rented another place with a kitchen, and they called me up. I'd given a deposit, subject to my roommate approval, because I saw it first. And she called him, she said, your roommate's name is Rosenthal. She She said, Betty Rosenthal. She said, that's a Jewish name. And I said, well, we are Jewish. Well, you didn't tell me that. She said, we don't accept Jews, So that was another one of the many experiences.
What year would this have been?
1936.
Just
And
before
this happened to
Hitler
me
and
in
all.
41 with, not 41, 44, when I was pregnant with David. I couldn't get a house because I was Jewish. So he got me to tell him those experiences, and Harry Warner happened to be visiting the radio station to see that everything was in order because it was a new thing in honor of Major Albert. And I'm sure, mostly to ingratiate himself with Mr. Warner, that he ran out into the hall and into the lobby and he said, Mr. Warner, there's a young woman here whose story I think you should hear. I think you would be very interested. Because Warner in those days, you have to remember this is 36, it's the rise, Hitler's been in power for 3 years. Jews are aware of the danger of
What's
Nazism. Other people don't think, Jews always cry. They're a complaining people. They don't take it very seriously. But Warner was taking it seriously. And he was preparing things like, that would come later, Confessions of a Nazi Spy would be 3-4 years later. But he was taking the menace seriously, and he sort of regarded himself as the kind of the father figure of the Jewish community. This is significant if you ever read that book on Hollywood Jews.
The Jews who invented Hollywood.
That's right, but the thing is that they all didn't want to be Jews. They are responsible for the picture that Americans have of what America is like because that's their fairy tale of what it means to be an American. And by the same token, you're not Jewish, and some of them even converted. But Warner was adamant about his identification as a Jew and as a leader of the Jewish community. So when they brought this story to his attention, he didn't come in to talk to me. Bob told him the story. He called Maislish, and he said to Maislish, find that woman a job and report this to the Anti-Defamation League. So that's how I hadn't been, we gave ourselves a couple of months. We took a leave of absence.
Your job's in New York?
We would go back to New York because in 1936, during the height of the Depression, nobody gave up a paying job, and certainly not a civil service job. So then I got the job first. And after I'd worked for Maislish a couple of weeks, I got him to introduce Betty to the Warner Brothers studio where the films were being made. And by luck, she got assigned to Gene Negulescu, the director, who was then engaged to Billy Barnes. I mean, these are names that mean nothing to you, but if you go back in early Hollywood history, they're kind of important names.
When you say assigned to, was she assigned as a secretary?
Yeah, right.
Or?
Well, she worked out of the pool, but he had a right to interrupt whatever work she was doing to bring. And then after a while, I think she was even in his office as his secretary, full-time secretary.
So you was 23 years old and started, and what job did you have there?
Well, and originally, Bob White said to Maislish, now I've done what I could to set you up a good program. I want you to return the favor and have Miss Davidson type up some scripts for me. He said, absolutely. So originally I sat, and Bob said to me, these are old scripts, and you don't have to type them. You can type ASDF, semicolon, LKJ, I don't care what you do with it. Just sit there and look available. And one day, they're going to need somebody in a hurry. They're going to ask you to leave what you're doing. And, it wasn't a matter. It wasn't very, very soon that I began working for Gus Edwards. You don't know that name either, but he introduced Walter Winchell, Eddie Cantor, Georgie Jessel, the whole School Days of the Air, Milton Berle. So we did a program in which all these big shots, people who are now famous, would come back on do a guest spot for us on School Days. And then I began working for Eddie Peabody, who was the world's famous banjo player.
It must have been magic to be 23 years old and all of a sudden with all these famous people.
Yeah, and then you see, our radio station was in the old Warner Brothers lot, the old Vitagraph lot. When sound came in, they wanted much more up-to-date facilities. So they needed much more space. They wanted a big lot. This was right in the heart of Hollywood. So they moved out to the Burbank, which is where they are even today. And we began to rent out those facilities for a bowling alley up on Sunset Boulevard, and the one that was immediately behind our building, one of the sound stages was converted into the radio station. Then right behind us, we built a theater, and CBS and NBC didn't have a theater. They didn't have a West Coast facility at all. All their big programs originated in New York City, and in those days, you didn't have coast-to-coast broadcast. You had what you call TC broadcast, transcontinental. You hooked up by phone to Chicago, from Chicago to Detroit on, and you rented those lines for TC, for transcontinental broadcast. So we had the facilities for a TC broadcast, and NBC and CBS rented our facilities, and in that way I got to see day after day Laurence Olivier and Vivian Lee. Oh God, Ronnie, you've never seen two such beautiful people in all your life. They would walk hand in hand, devouring each other with their eyes. They were both married at the time. They not
Other
yet.
people.
I used to look out my window directly onto them because the path was right immediately in front of me, and my heart would race because I would know nothing like that would ever happen to me. They were so in love, and they were so beautiful. Al Jolson used to sit in a chair with his chair up against my window, with his brown, thick skin getting more tanned, and Charles Boyer did the broadcasting. I mean, it was magic because these were people I would never even talk to, except the Warner Brothers stars all came in because Harry Maeslish was he got the job as the director, as the manager of KFWB, which he, in the end, wound up purchasing from Warner Brothers because they wanted out of the broadcast business, and he sold it for millions of dollars. But at that time, he got the job as a reward for the fact that he was probably one of the smartest, best exploitation people anywhere in the world. I mean, Warner was doing an awful lot of these things, these musicals before. Busby Berkeley was at Warner Brothers originally before he went to MGM. So they were doing a lot of this Dick Powell and Joan Blondell was in them, but the girl who married Al Jolson, Ruby Keeler, they were doing a lot of those musicals, and Maeslish was so fertile with ideas for exploiting things that he got the job as a manager to reward him for this. So all the old stars would come in.
Must have been wonderful.
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, people like Hugh Herbert coming in and making fun, and Alan Jenkins saying, "What's he doing in there?" Is he looking at dirty pictures? It all seemed marvelous. But a lot of people went through there because they came to, they were fond of him. He had done well for them.
How long did you stay there with him?
Well, we became an item. I mean, we were, I guess, I went to work for him in 1936, and I left him in, Poland was September 1st, 1939.
Right.
And I was still working for him then, so it's late 39 or early 40.
Almost 4 years.
Yeah, and the reason for it was that we were going to be married, and he was embarrassed to be marrying a mere secretary. So he was looking around for some kind of a business, like a bookshop, or something that would have some intellectual or elegant, panache to it, so he couldn't be said to be marrying just a secretary. And that's when Michelle came. And one day I said to him, "You're not going to marry a mere secretary because you don't have one." And I went home, and he didn't take it seriously until he found out that I was seeing Michelle. And then came the architect with the plans and the fur coat and the diamond ring that was big enough to knock your eyes out. And by that time, I couldn't believe it. I simply couldn't believe that I'd spent 3 years being so in love with this man and that I didn't want him anymore. I couldn't believe it.
Couldn't believe that you could have such a change of heart?
Mm-hmm. And in some ways, you see, in some ways, when I first chose Michelle rather than Maeslish, I don't know how much of my heart was involved with Michelle. I knew it was going to be a hard sledding,
Yeah.
is it? Whatever. I thought knew it was going to be hard going because he didn't have any job and he had no money. But I was dazzled intellectually and greedy for the cultural adventures that he was offering.
How much older was he than you at the time?
14 years.
So you were, what, about 26?
Yeah.
So he was around 40? Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, after the first date we had, he said to me, there's something I have to tell you. I haven't been honest with you entirely, and there's something I have to tell you. He's very, very upset about it. So I assumed that having had to escape from Germany, he had probably killed somebody, and that it was too hard on, that they had done something really quite dreadful. And all evening I kept saying, well, tell me now. And he said, no, later, And then he told me that he wasn't 39, he was 40. And that somebody had told him that in America they have such a phobia about age, and he should never admit to being 40.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
So then did you go thereafter to work at another part of Warner's?
Yeah, at the Warner Brothers Theaters, because I felt that that was such a stupid job that I would have all my resources available for Michelle. And
When did you start there?
Immediately from, I took the summer off.
Summer 39?
Yeah, and then I began working in Warner Brothers Theater. It was just too dull and too boring. And at that point, Michelle discovered that I was, they used to have outside readers at all the studios. When I became president of the union, not because I was president, but because it was at that time that we did it, we outlawed reading on an outside contract basis.
I don't even know what you mean by a reader.
Every studio had a story department, and the scenarios or short stories or novels that were submitted would be covered by a reader, by a story analyst. We call them story analysts.
To give a recommendation?
Yeah, to give a synopsis, to say what it was about, and to say whether they should buy it or not buy it, and how it could be used, or if it could be used. And to save money, they used to give these jobs out to people for $5 a book. And readers were only paid $59.20 a week. No, they were paid $25 a week because everybody reads. But people were absolutely dying to get a job as a reader because Lillian Hellman started that way, Dalton Jumbo started that way.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and what makes Sammy run? Jesus, I can see him in front of me. His father was president of Paramount. You know what makes Sammy run?
Actually, I don't.
Okay.
I remember they made a movie of it, but I don't know who wrote the book.
The name will come to me. I can see his face in front of me. These memoirs are going to be full of words that I can't remember, the faces, and I can't place the names I can't remember. Anyway, they all started as readers, and so that was the best way to get in because you walked up to the set, you got in a conversation with the director, you mentioned, and that way you got to know people, you got to get inside
And they got
the
to know
business.
you.
Right. And so Michelle was working as an outside reader in that way, hoping to get a job inside the studio, which he did eventually.
Outside reader being like a contract person.
That's right. And he got paid by the book.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes he had things to do because one of the things he did as a member of the European community, as new people would come into the city, they could be rescued from Germany by being offered a contract. So they came on a working visa, and that's one way to get them out of the country. Well, the idea was that the Jewish community felt that help them learn how to, they were writers, most of them, or musicians, help them how to do the work for the studio so that the work they're getting paid for, studio didn't expect any work, but as long as they're getting paid, help them to get into the business and maybe they can have a job after those 6 months. So it was his job to see people like that and to help them, to acclimatize them in some ways. And, as one man said, every street that he walked along in Beverly Hills was Vienna to him, but he couldn't recognize the houses because they were all living in a kind of fantasy past. So I would listen to the radio program or read the article, whatever it was. I would do it for him and then give him a quick synopsis. Then after a while, it was easier for me to sit down at the typewriter and do it. One day he said to me, you're better at this than I am. Why don't you get a job working? You're much better at this than I am. So I wrote up 3 samples, and I sent it to 20th and to Metro and to Paramount, not to RKO, because that's where he worked. And I got an offer from all 3 the next week. And I'm the first person who started in without doing any outside contract work. Mm-hmm. And then when I became president, we outlawed contract work, except for languages. For material written in languages that were not English. Mm-hmm. Then you could assign it to anybody on a contract basis. Mm-hmm. And we upped the salary the first year from 25 to 50 to 40 to 125.90, depending on the numbers of years. I'm very proud of that. But Michel deserves some credit for it, because he conceived the notion that as a pre-production skill, we were only the gleam in Papa's eyes, and nobody was interested in what happened before the baby was conceived. Mm-hmm. It was the conception and the baby that people were willing to pay money for, but the fact that Papa got a gleam in his eyes, which took him to conception, was something that was not highly valued. Mm-hmm. And with that as reasoning, we then did, for the first time that was done in the industry, by which I mean the motion picture industry, I think it was 39 pages, a booklet making an argument about, and they were just dazzled. They had such fun with us in our negotiations. They just had fun with us because we were young kids, every one of us. Almost everybody on that committee later became either a writer, a director, or a producer, except for me. So they were bright, gifted people. And
we were bright, gifted people.
As an example, why Frank Freeman once, I was working at Paramount, came by and he took some change and he said, "You're sorry, such a hardship story. Can I help you out?" just teasing. But they never heard of negotiations taking place with the heads of the studios themselves coming. But they, instead of leaving it to the business managers, in about, I guess, out of the 7 studios, about 4 of them came with the head of the studios themselves.
Did you do negotiating directly yourself?
Yeah. Well, actually, we didn't negotiate with them immediately. They ignored us, so we joined the International Brotherhood of Painters, Paper Hangers, and Decorators of America.
AFL-CIO.
Yeah, and in those days, just AFL, I think.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, and when Herb Sorrell, who was the head of the local, came with us, they said, "What the hell have they got to do with painters?" He said, "They paint with words, don't they?" So it was the SWAT of the association, because we then became Local 1488. They didn't pay any attention to us until we were Local 1488.
And then they had to take you seriously.
Yeah, because we were part of the Conference of Studio Unions, which later, out on strike that still this day is not settled. I mean, the IATSE broke that union. I mean, the set decorators, the cartoonists, the publicists, the Screen Story Analysts Guild, the carpenters, and the electricians. There are 2 more. I've forgotten. They broke the CSU on that strike. And you know what did it? National Labor Relations Board.
What did they do?
They allowed the scabs to vote.
Probably because the time period had run.
Well, we were out for, first time we were out, I think, for 8 months. Then we were out for 2 days. At that time we were smart. We went out on a demand of 25% increase for everyone. All of a sudden, stage hands were out, backlot people were out, the actors were out, nobody went to work for 2 days. So that we won. And I remember when we went back to work, I remember Fred Pelton, who was the managing thing for the motion picture producers of America, said, "Don't exalt too much. You don't know what the 3 wise men are going to come up with." The 3 wise men being the international presidents of the 3 big unions in the AFL. The painters, it was the international, and they sold us down the river. They gave us our way to the IA.
What year was that?
Oh, that was much later on. That was 1940. David was born in 45. And I hit the picket line when he was 10 days old.
Wow.
And he was 2 years old when I was still picketing. I have a picture of him refusing to hold up a sign that says, "My mommy wants to go back to work." Had it down the gutter. He would hold it up.
So you started with the studio in 40?
No,
roughly?
40. I went to work I went to work at the motion pictures. I guess I worked for Baselish until 1940. Then I went to work for the Warner Brothers Theater Department, which is why I know a lot about distribution
Right.
and booking. And a year later, I went to work for Paramount in 1941.
Work through then till...
I worked until 48 when Tony was born.
And then stopped.
Well, I couldn't have gotten a job anyway. I don't think. I know I couldn't have. Michelle was already... no, he wasn't blacklisted. Excuse me. Michelle wasn't blacklisted until 1950 or 51.
But you had two small children at that point.
Right. Yeah.
And what year did Michelle die?
1954. He was blacklisted for 3 years. Those were the very, very tough years. I think I've mentioned to you before that we didn't dare accept an invitation for dinner because we were afraid we'd make pigs of ourselves. The smell of meat was just too much. But they were the best years of our marriage.
What year did you get married? 40 or not?
41.
41.
Yeah. We had to wait until Michelle became a citizen. No, not for him to become a citizen. We had to wait for Francie to get here so they could get a divorce. Mm-hmm. And then he wanted to be a citizen. I don't remember why now, but he did. And that was just a matter of months, before we took the...
So you were married from 41 to 54?
Yeah.
A short time,
very
really?
Very short, 13 years. Very, very short. But those last 3 years, which were so hard financially, and we worked so hard, God, how we worked.
How was he able to generate money?
But they were the best years of our marriage. They were really wonderful. Well, he wrote... I had to write to this man in Finland about the things he wrote on the black market. He wrote about 12 plays on the black market, and...
He worked at home, so he was around?
Yeah.
Which was nice, wasn't it, for the kids?
Well, kids didn't... no, he worked in my mother's house. He was not somebody who functioned well with a lot of commotion around.
Were she and your father both out here at that point?
At that point, my father was dead. My father died in 1947, and David was 2.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother moved to a very sweet apartment over a garage about 3 miles from where I lived. And Michelle would go over there because she worked in a factory. Mm-hmm. And he would go over there and write there. He wrote by hand. He didn't write by typewriter. Mm-hmm. And then I would do the typing at night.
Your both sisters out here at that point?
Gertie lived in she lived first in Sacramento and then in San Jose.
This is with her husband?
Yeah, and 3 children. And Leah lived first in New York and then in San Francisco, so it depends on about what period of time we're talking about. When Michelle died, Leah was living in San Francisco already, and Gertie was living in San Jose.
Mm-hmm. And Gertie's husband was alive at that point?
Yes. Mine died first, and Leah's the only one with a... Beatrice Kravetsky called me today, and she said, we're all going to Ashland for the Shakespearean Follies, and she said, it's just occurred to me I'm the only one left with a husband. And I said, treasure him. He really is a treasure.
Is she the woman that you went to Mexico with?
Yes.
And her husband?
Yeah.
That,
I didn't go with her there, but I joined her there.
She has short white hair.
Yeah. She's very attractive.
Uh-huh.
She's very bright.
Animated. And
yeah, very lively.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't.
I turned out to be a lot more talkative than I think you
Well, it's so
expected.
interesting. No, I think not. It's amazing how I don't know as much about you as one would think.
Well,
you know?
some of these stories I'm sure fitted with things I've said to you.
Some
and,
of them,
and
yeah.
told them,
Yeah.
you know, you tend to collapse stories a little bit
Uh-huh.
because they get to be.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it is as much as this is your life, Florence Michelle. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling it to you in more detail than I probably have told you.
And in more in sequence, so you can sort of piece it all
Yeah.
together.
And in a way, you know, it's kind of fun for me because I'm at a place in my life where I'm beginning to close the circle. And it's not unusual that you look back and examine and see, you know, can you pronounce it a good one?
You know that at the beginning of Remembrance of Things Past, where he has that little piece of cake that brings it all back, and
Yeah. What is it
and
called? Not Charlotte.
the Madeleine.
Madeline.
Or Madeleine.
Yeah, Madeline.
And the thinking, the remembering it maybe is a gift. I don't know. The growing up in Mineola. So you were there all from the time you were born.
No. I was born in Brooklyn, close to Prospect Park.
You remember where? The street?
Lincoln Place. I think 1215 Lincoln Place.
At home?
At home. Oh, sure. All three
Everybody,
children.
yeah.
All three children born at home.
What did your dad do at the time?
My father was a milliner. He was both a designer. He also made hats from time to time when he was just a lowly plebeian. Then he sewed hats, made hats, and blocked them.
Do you remember who he
But he
worked
was-
for?
Well, I remember that the one that they bragged about all the time was John Fredericks, which was the creme de la creme de la creme.
Because it
pirate-
doesn't make
to
any
pirate
noise
concerts.
or anything.
Yeah, no, it's an incredible machine, really incredible.
He was trained in Paris?
My father was trained as a milliner in Paris.
Where did he come from initially?
He was born in what was then Russia, served in the Russian army during the Japanese War. What was that war called? I forgot. It's got a name.
Then he
And
went to Paris?
where he was born was Warsaw.
Oh, I didn't know.
It was part of the Russian Empire in those
I
days.
see.
And then I don't know at what point he went to Paris. I know that his mother died when he was 5, and his father married, and he had 10 half-brothers and sisters.
Wow.
He hated his stepmother, and he never acknowledged the sisters as being siblings. And I remember only one story that the stepmother hated him, and we give him a very small portion of, all three of us have heard the story endless times, very small part of the dinner, and give her children lavish portions. And his father would come to the table and rage and say, "What do you mean? Everybody give Yossel. Everybody has to give Yossel some." So he wound up with a big platter full, because every child had to give him something from her plate.
His name was Yossel? Davidson?
Joseph, yeah.
Joseph Davidson.
Yossel is the Jewish name. It was Michelle's too, by the way. And
So he went to Paris?
he went to Paris, where he was trained as a milliner, came to this country. I'd have to look at the citizenship papers.
You don't recall what year, roughly?
No.
Was he
my
married?
mother was 15. No, he never married before we married my mother. He was already in his 40s, I think, when he married my mother, who was...
Here?
He was also 14 years older than my mother. And so my mother was, my mother was 23 when she married. He was 14 years older. That would make him 37, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so he was 39 when I was born, I guess.
What was her name? Do you know?
Rose Ornstein.
Orenstein?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
And she was from Warsaw, too?
No, she was from Romania.
Romania?
Yeah.
She
Right
came-
on the Russian border. And she came... See, first her father walked across Europe. I mean, they were different people in those days. There was no such thing as... Maybe he got a ride on carts from time to time, I don't know. But he walked to Aberdeen. Now, he had to have taken a ferry to get to Aberdeen.
Aberdeen, Scotland.
Yeah. And took a boat to America.
To New York City.
Yeah, in New York City, wound up on the east side, around, well, the first thing I remember is Cook Street, but it was around Orchard Street and Hester Street,
Like the movie?
Yeah, like the movie, exactly. And I remember those days. I remember the wash across the street. And I remember the man who came around with a merry-go-round that he wound by himself.
Great.
And I remember wrapping the penny in a piece of paper and throwing it down for the monkey rider, for the monkey to pick up. The monkey would tip his hat. As poor as we were, Grandma always gave him a penny to wrap up and throw down. And the push cart peddlers, I remember them, old clothes.
So she and her family came. She was 15 when she came.
Well, they sent for for the rest of the family. I don't know when Irving came. Irving came separately. I think he first
Your
came.
mother's brother?
Brother, only brother. Then my grandmother and Molly and my mother came. And
Molly's
Molly
your mom's sister.
was my mom's sister, and she was sent back at Ellis Island because she had an eye disease, and she was sent back twice. And the third time she came, she was admitted, but she was sent to Vienna to be treated.
Mm-hmm.
And they must have had friends or somebody there.
Mm-hmm.
They came in steerage class. You took all your food along. You packed your food for the long, I think, 8-day journey in third class, steerage class. You had no beds. You lay down.
Did your mom ever have any pictures of herself when that all was done? No?
Mother had no memory of most of these things. Just every once in a while something would... My mother danced like an angel. Never lost her love for dancing. And so she could tell you stories about dances.
On the boat?
About occasions when you danced, you know. When the grapes were in, you went to help the neighbors make the wine, and you stamped with your feet, and then afterwards you danced and you sang. And,
What year was she born, do you know?
18, we think. Monsieur was born in 1899. My mother was born in 1889. We think. My uncle always maintained she was a little older than that. They made her 23 for my father, so she wouldn't look like an old maid. But as it was, she lived to be 94 with my reasoning, with the 1899. She may have been 96 for all we know. But...
So they came to Hester Street or thereabouts?
Yeah, in that area.
Mm-hmm.
When I was born, or when I was already visiting, by the time I came to visit, they had an indoor toilet.
Your grandparents?
Yeah, they didn't have to go... No, not an indoor in their own place, an indoor in the building.
Yeah.
That you shared with 4 other tenants. But you didn't have to go outside anymore. And I remember my wonder. I can remember my wonder when they lit these incandescent lights. They weren't electricity, but they looked like electricity. They had a little cotton sack that lit up. I remember that. I don't remember candles, though. So we must have lived in a better neighborhood.
Did they ever talk?
My mother and father must have lived in a better
When they were
neighborhood than my
together?
grandparents.
Did your mom and dad ever talk to you about how they got together, how they met each other and all?
My mother was courted by a doctor who wanted to marry her, but you know the story about my mother's illiteracy. I've written about it, and I think I've told you about it. My mother felt she wasn't good enough for a doctor. I don't know how they met, but I know that my mother said she was never in love with him, but she felt very sorry for him because he was so lonely, and he had no family.
He would have been 40, too.
Yeah, and he said that he fell in love with her hands, that she had the most beautiful hands he'd ever seen. I'm sure he read that in a book somewhere. My father was given to things like that. Very romantic.
Was she working at the time he met her, or you don't know?
Yes, I think so. She probably was working in... my mother belongs to that Triangle Shirt Factory at the time.
Oh.
And she has told me stories about the fact that you see at the famous Triangle Shirt Factory, they had no way of using the fire escape because they used the fire escape to put extra material out there. And they used to lock the bathrooms so you wouldn't take time to go out to the bathroom. And my mother worked under the same conditions as that. And when she did fine shirts. I've seen pictures of, and you've seen a picture of my mother up there. That's a wonderful dress, and she was a fine seamstress. But she made shirtwaists. And no, my mother couldn't work after she was married. My father would have killed himself and her. And he would have been. I remember during the Depression when my mother pleaded with him to to let her go to work. And he said, you can't disgrace me that way. So they opened a store, which failed. And they opened another store, which failed.
This out in Mineola at this point?
2 stores in Mineola, and then they opened up a rental costume place. And my father ran that alone until the day he was robbed and tied up and bound. And he was afraid to go into the store after that, so my mother went with him always. And it wasn't until we moved from Mineola to Brooklyn when we lost our house.
Lost the house in Mineola.
For $250. My father got screwed out of it. He trusted a neighbor.
Remember when that was? What year?
Well, let's see. I graduated from school when I was 17. So that would have been 30. And I worked in Hempstead for another 2 years. 3. That would probably be about 1933.
Right in the middle of the Depression.
Yeah, well, as a matter of fact, on the big parade, that all the unions turned out to parade down Fifth Avenue. Everybody turned out when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was inaugurated. My father was on top of a lamppost. By the time my contingent walked by, he was yelling, "Florence!" because his contingent had long since gone. I think we were still living in Mineola. So it must have been late in 33. Mm-hmm. We lost the house for lack of a payment of $250. It's a wonderful house. And
your 2 sisters were alive by that time?
My 2 sisters were still going to high school. Mm-hmm. Well, I could figure it out from that because Gertie's just 3 years behind me. Mm-hmm. And she still was going to high school. So
in Mineola?
Yeah. No, she was going to high school in Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. So it must have been earlier than that we moved to, I could figure it out if it were important, to Brooklyn. We moved first to Bensonhurst, then up to the Bronx.
Bensonhurst, isn't that ironic?
Yeah, right. And then up to the Bronx, on the east side, poor side. And
didn't you tell me once that you moved a lot, that you got like a month's free rent or something?
That's right. Everybody moved on September 1st. Everybody did. I thought about it to myself the other day. I stay in one place, but the first year that I was in Hollywood, we moved 13 times.
Why?
Well, we were trying things out and trying out different neighborhoods, and we had just the clothes to move. We always rented furnished places, so we had only our clothes to move and books.
How did you know Betty? From working with her, or you grew up with her? Or?
No, from working with her. It's funny that it's hard for me to remember that I loved her so. What a shrike! What a really terrible woman she was, and what a terrible thing it says about me that I allowed myself to be so abused by her.
Is she the woman that you said Michelle once made a remark because she was very hard on you about the way you looked or something?
About everything. She called me fat ass. She never had, she always had negative things to say, hurtful things, and he said to me one day, "I will not marry you out of Betty's house." So that's when I went to live by myself and moved out. And like a gutless coward, I left my sister Lee with Betty, but only for a couple of months until Lee could join me.
Was Lee treated the same way?
Yeah, even worse. The thing was, the college begins with a P. It's a Presbyterian college in Los Angeles. It's a pretty well-known college. Not ridiculous.
Pomona?
No. The college is in Malibu, and there's one in Los Angeles, and there's one out in Orange County now. I'll think about it. It's a fairly well-known college in Southern California. The man who made a fortune and was able to endow these pieces of property to build the school, lots of people at Warner Brothers thought I was having an affair with him. First of all, I wouldn't have known what was going on. I mean, I was absolutely, totally innocent. But he loved me. He just thought I was absolutely marvelous. He owned all kinds of hotels, and apartment hotels throughout the city, very elegant ones. Now, in those years, you could rent a very nice apartment. I mean, our first one, I think, was $27.50 or something. You could get a really wonderful apartment for $50.
Isn't that amazing?
He charged me 50% of the rent. And so we had a $100 apartment in the heart of Hollywood. And we had it because of me. And my name was Davidson. And Lee came out, her name was Davidson. And Betty couldn't have kept the apartment on if she was responsible for the rent. Davidson had to be signing for it. So that's why Lee stayed on another 2 months until I told Betty that I was going to let him know that I wasn't using the apartment any longer. So Betty had to find her own place. But she was so mean to me.
Did you ever call her on it? Or that was for another time, I guess, sort of telling people you can't do that?
Yeah. It's, I don't remember many. I remember a couple of fights with her when I remember she got very subdued. I was astonished at how she backed down. A couple of times I walked out and told her off, and then she always came and apologized.
What became of her?
I don't know.
You lost touch over the years?
I heard rumors from time to time about people running into her.
Mm-hmm.
She never married, and
Lived in Los Angeles?
no, she went back to New York.
Oh, she did?
Yeah,
You don't know if she's still alive or not?
I don't care. It's there are very few people that I have cared about a great deal that I wound up hating or not caring one little thing about them. She's one. And I think the feeling is very intense because I have so little respect for myself for having allowed her to treat me the way she treated me. I remember people at Warner Brothers saying, "My God, why do you let her talk to you that way?"
And Michelle picked up on it right away.
Strange thing is, when I first met Michelle, I knew he liked me. I was holding on to him because I thought he was too good to waste. And so I would bring him around. Betty fell in love with him with word go. She gave it away after a couple of weeks saying, "Oh, my darling, you're here." With a tone of voice that, he was scared. But I brought him around because I thought he would get to like her. I thought she was beautiful. And blonde hair and blue eyes, and she had a beautiful singing voice. Beautiful singing voice. And gorgeous legs. Her body was misshapen. She was sort of, it's almost like a hunch,
Forward.
It was almost as if she was hunched, like a hunchback, across the shoulders. But otherwise, I thought she was quite lovely and animated and good company. Good. We had lots of fun. And we did a lot of adventurous things. But she didn't have a single boyfriend while she was here. And I never understood that. I really never did, because I thought that she was a beauty. And, people weren't knocking down my door, but I was almost never without somebody. And I'd come in at 3 o'clock in the morning sometimes, coming in very slowly, and she'd say, "Don't tiptoe, hot pants. I know what you've been up to."
Ooh. Hostile lady.
Yeah. But I thought she was wonderful for a while.
Tell me, you started to tell me once, and then we didn't.
I think the one reason I dislike her so much is I dislike myself at that time.
The image that it shows of
I mean, my God, how can you respect anybody who behaved the way I did and let her do to me? Because when I stopped her, it stopped her cold. I remember on a couple of occasions saying, "That is the last word out of you, because I am gone." And she'd come crying and crawling and saying, "I don't know what got into me, and don't do that." I'd come back.
You started to tell me the other day, and then we, I guess, got off the subject about how you introduced Lee to Rebels.
Yeah. Lee was married to Bill, whose last name I've forgotten by now, too. Bill was in the Army, and he went overseas, and he was slightly wounded.
During the Second World War.
Yeah, And I didn't know it at the time, but Lee told me much later on that she had said to herself that she knew that she didn't want the marriage. She was crazy about his father. She was just crazy about his father, but she didn't like him. She didn't love him, I should say. I don't know about like. And she had told herself that if he came back and he was not wounded, she was going to ask for a divorce. But when he came back, she really tried to make a go of it again. And he wouldn't. They were rich people, and he wouldn't allow her to go to work, and she was bored. So she lived with me, waiting for him to be returned from overseas.
In Los Angeles.
In Hollywood. And
Michelle was married. You were married to Michelle?
Michelle insisted on, Michelle and I were living together, but he insisted on some kind of, whatever would be to protect me. He rented a room around the corner, and he got his mail there. And it was sheer nonsense, but the three of us shared this
place.
Yeah, and we shared the expense of the food and things like that. Michelle was crazy about Lee. Lee has a very good sense of humor. She's very quick-witted. She's very quick and witty. And that's where I told you he didn't think I had much of a sense of humor at all, because they would go so fast. They were so fast, the two of them. And I was still trying to catch up with the last crack. But Bill came back, and she, I guess, decided that she would try it again. And she went back east, and I said to her, about that time, I brought Revels to the house, and they met in my house. And I don't think it was when Paul came to the house.
How did you know Revels?
I was assigned by the studio. It's a crazy thing. When I was doing story analyses, Bill Dozier was courting and then married Joan Fontaine. And I was considered maybe the best analyst they had there, the best story reader, or not so much the synopses as it was the analyses of the way in which I did an analysis of a property.
Or what to do with it.
What to do with it, and the story doctoring that I could suggest and things like that. So Bill Dozier got into the habit of sending me scripts for Joan Fontaine and asking my opinion about it. And he did a couple of pictures. He did one with Veronica Lake when she was his mistress, when they were lovers. He sent me that, and I remember commenting on how the script should have been rewritten or something. So he got into the habit of trusting me with some material. About in 1942 or 3, the so-called Zoot Suit riots had happened in... What you asked me, how did I...
How you ever got to know Revels?
Yeah.
To introduce him in the first place.
So-called Zoot Suit riots had taken place in Los Angeles. And Walter Wanger went down with a bunch of Hollywood people, who included John Howard Lawson, who was one of the Hollywood 10. And Governor Bowen made a somewhat racist remark, which Jack Lawson was very quick to fasten on. And they demanded of him that he should have a program for racial harmony. We were all at war, and this was no time for people to be fighting the Spaniards, the Mexicans, and there was a lot of racism in Los Angeles. Always was. And he said, I don't have a budget for a research worker to see what resources are available to me. And Walter Wanger said, we will provide you with the best research specialist in the business. But he had a very small studio. So he called up his good friend, Henry Ginsberg, who was vice president of Paramount Studios, and said, Henry, I need you to assign me, and he told him the story and asked him for a research worker. Ginsberg said, okay, I'll get you the best in the business. He called Dozier, who was his right-hand assistant. He was head of the story department, but also he was producing. So he asked Dozier. So Dozier said, I'll get you the best in the business. And he took me. I didn't know my ass from my elbow. I didn't know where to start. How do you research? What do you say to people? Do you hate blacks? You know, they were blacks. Do you hate Negroes? Do you hate Jews? Do you hate Mexicans? Well, how do you start? Thank God I was married to Michelle. I mean, this was second nature to him, the kind of things that you could do in the paper, the Economic Weekly that he managed. So Michelle wrote out the directions for me. Michelle set down the whole thing So I knew I had to interview Protestants, I had to interview Jews and Catholics and Mexicans and Negroes.
Negro.
And you just name it, I had to have a reflection of every part of the society, of the community. And I went first to the CIO to ask about, I was told ahead of time, don't stay away from Revels Caton. His brother, Horace Caton, is a communist. They had it backwards, and is a troublemaker. But stay away, you don't want to be anybody from that family. So I had to go with labor, and I went to CIO, and I went to see Sim Connolly, and he said, you want to see Revels Caton? I said, no, I really don't want to see Revels Caton. I went to see Charlotte Bass, I went to see Gus Hawkins, Everybody said, you want to see Revels Caton. Revels had been sent down from San Francisco to be director of minorities in employment because the shipyards were here. Well, they were here
With
too.
the CIO.
With the CIO. So no matter what I did, everybody sent me to see Revels. And I went to see Revels, and we sat across the table from each other, and I asked questions, and he gave me very good answers, and I thought to myself, you goddamn, what do you call Tom, you goddamn Tom. What an Uncle Tom you are. And I just asked questions, and at one point I got so irritated that I burst forth with something and said, but what will you do? And he sat back and he said, well, now let's talk. He said, you're all right. In your day, you'd have been an abolitionist. So then we really began talking. And he was watching my face when this beautiful, very, very fair woman came in. And he talked to her in a very intimate way. And he said, this is my wife. And I was startled, I have to admit. Well, I began to add Revels to the house, and we got to be friends. And
He was still
loved,
married.
Yeah, he absolutely loved Michelle, but there was trouble in marriage, you could tell. He was always asking Michelle to help patch them, to talk reason to them. And so that marriage was breaking up, and I think broke up when he was assigned to be the executive secretary of the National Negro Congress, and he had to go to Harlem, which was a shock to him, because his family came from Seattle, and they were very well regarded and influential and politically important. And he had never lived a segregated life until he got to New York and had to live in Harlem. So culturally, that was a tremendous shock for him. But I already knew him well enough to know that he was brilliant, but administratively, for the birds. So I said to my sister, as long as you haven't got a job and you're not working, and why don't you do some volunteer work? My friend Revels Caton could really use somebody with your organizational skills. Go up and set him up in the office and get him started.
Back in Harlem, you mean?
Back in Harlem, so she did. She had met him already in my apartment. He had come one night for dinner. And as I say, I don't remember whether he brought Paul Robeson with him then, or it was another time, because I met Paul for the first time. Well, I met him backstage once with other friends. But I met him for the first time in my house when David was a little baby, and we left him on the floor. Michelle and I were upstairs. We used to leave the door open. In those days, people didn't lock their doors. And all of a sudden, we hear this voice saying, "Little David was small, but oh my." I said, Michelle, he couldn't turn the record up. He couldn't turn the record up. We thought that David had turned the record up.
That's a wonderful story.
Yeah.
So then she went to Harlem, and then they got together?
The rest, as they say, is history.
Since the 40s.
That does look nice, It's lovely.
Isn't it nice?
Yeah, it's very nice.
I think so. I think so. By this time, your other sister, how did she come? How had she come to get married?
We went to war in 1941, and the Army recruited WACs into an auxiliary army. A year later, they became part of the regular Army, but at first it was the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps, WAAC, and my sister enlisted in the WACs and was assigned to a factory in Sacramento, where they put little pieces together for the radio thing on that. And that's where she met Ted Tiponi, who was a lawyer and working in some kind of government agency. He never practiced law. And just about the time that the Army decided to make the blacks, to drop one of the A's and make them part of the actual Army. They were Women's Army, not the Auxiliary, Women's Army Corps.
Right.
She decided, she got married and decided to, she got married in 44, because she's the first one to have a child, and she stole my child's name. Everybody knew from the time I was 8 years old. Leah and I were so mad at her for years. For years
What
we held
name
it against
was
it. From the time I was 8 years old, everybody knew that I would have a child called David. And they used to say to me, suppose it's a girl, and I'd say, then it'd be Davida, you know? And so our first child was born, she named him David. And that put us on very, very bad terms with each other for a long time. Because to this day, she tries to beat me out being Florence. She wants to be Florence before I get to be Florence. And we're good friends now because I recognize it when it happens, you know? And since I'm aware of what's going on, I'm not so subject to it viscerally as I was at the beginning. But when her kid is 6 weeks older than mine, when she announced that she was calling her son David, I said, you know that that's my child's name. I got there first.
When you say that about wants to be Florence before you're Florence, give me some examples of that. What do you mean?
Well, we're traveling with my mother, and I go into her room one day because we took turns sleeping with my mother. Sometimes she would have a private room, sometimes I would have a private room. We
When
always had
she
two
was
bedrooms.
elderly? When your mother
My
was
mother
elderly?
was already past 70, in her 70s, and past 75, yeah. So the three of us were traveling through Israel, and I go and I say, this is one example. You know, we have 2 weeks here with Mama. She wants to see her name in the Golden Book. She wants to see the trees she has planted. She wants to see the dresses that she's made for the children. And I forgot what the fourth thing was. So I said, let's not do everything all at one time. Let's do it about every 3 days. So she always has something to look forward to. We always have a new adventure. And she can rest in between. We don't run from one thing to the other. She looks at me like that. An hour later she comes and says, I've been thinking, Florence, why don't we, and she gives me back my own words. That happened again and again. And, I would get mad and I'd say to her, what are you doing? You're taking my shade away. I mean, you give me back my own words. What? And it took me years to understand that she had to block out what I had said as if she'd never heard it, because if it came from me, it had to be good. She invested me with so much, smarts, and she just wanted to be me before I could get to be me. And we had that in our whole trip. Only this time I could catch it ahead of time, and I could say things to her, Gertie, stop trying to outrace me. It's no fun to be me. It really is. It's not that much fun to be me.
Give me an example on your trip.
One doesn't come to mind immediately, but it would be something very much
like what you just said.
Very much like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was, even obvious. One of the first things she did when I left, she had worn my black shawl, that cashmere shawl, and I showed her how it looked nice as she was going out to where it's, like kind of peon fashion that way. So when I left to come home, I said, why don't I leave the shawl with you, because it looks so nice on you. And when we got back, she said to me, I decided to get myself something. It is, wait till you see it. It is just smashing. It is so smart looking. I went out and I got myself a black wool shawl, and she's beginning to describe back to me what I've just lent her. Well, that's what I mean. That's what I mean by wanting to be Florence before I wanting to get to be Florence before I am. There's a compliment involved in it.
Yes, I see it.
In what she invests me with, and also jealousy that doesn't want me to have that quality, what she wants to have. And I'm not flattered by it. I feel that it wipes me out as if I didn't exist. Mm-hmm. But I'm not so irritated by it when it happens now. My reaction rather is, I wish you felt a little bit more secure about yourself. I wish you enjoyed yourself a little bit more. So I don't lose my temper. I used to have a much worse temper than I have now. I don't lose my temper so quickly. And I don't even get so angry. I don't even get so irritated by it as I used to.
Because it just more makes you sad?
Yeah, because she really is, she's a very good person, and she's very bright, and she has good ideas, and she's loving. She's very good to me. She admires me a lot. She likes me a lot. It's just that, that area, and
she wants to be you.
So I'm really not nearly so reactive to it as I used to be.
I remember you said once when you were talking about the two sisters that although the woman in Los Angeles is sweeter with you, that the real love was Lee.
Yeah.
It always has been hard.
Always has been, and she doesn't deserve it. In the sense that, my sister in Los Angeles earns every bit of my affection. She really does. She's worked very hard for it. I have also worked for it, but I've worked out of guilt. Because Lee and I, we shut her out in the early years very, very badly.
Early years out here?
No, early years growing up. Until I came, even after I came here, I sent for Lee. I sent her the money to come out here. Couldn't wait for my baby to come out. And we were just I told you, Lucy once said, when the two of us walked in together to visit her in the hospital, that just the body language of that closeness, she was jealous because she'd never had that with anybody before. And I just adored her, and I still love her. I am, as you know, much tougher in my objectivity about her, but that doesn't mean that it affects my emotions.
Have you ever talked to her recently about all of what happened? Remember there was some years?
Not much. It's painful for her, and she has the sense also about knowing where she's able to communicate what she'd rather not talk about. But you can see that she has great pleasure in the fact that her son and I get along well now. You can see the pleasure and the fact that she feels free and easy in her own mind if she wants to say something critical.
About him to you.
That's right.
And also that now you and she see each other,
Almost
several
every day.
times a week?
Almost every day we go walking. Yeah.
And do you talk when you walk?
Strangely enough, we do. She's very bright. We talk a lot about current events and politics, although her politics are much more conservative than mine.
It's a surprise, isn't it?
It has been for years. She, I think, regards herself as a pragmatist, as somebody who's lived in the political world, as she has. I have not. And you couldn't be around rebels and not be a political animal. But she's much more conservative than I am. I wouldn't call her conservative, but
on a scale.
Yeah, on a scale.
Is she able to talk about her affection for you? Really to verbalize it?
Especially when she's had a couple of drinks. Yeah, she.
Does that worry you?
She says I love you very much. Yeah, she says things like that. She's a really very. I do love her very dearly. She's still she still has the same place, I think. I have been very angry with her. I have felt very rejected and ignored.
I think you said
But
earlier on when you were up here and she was kind of going her way.
Yeah, my God, she lived right up the hill. How much did I ever see of her? And I was having a hard time going through school and everything. But I understand that, and I can feel the pain of it sometimes when I think about it, but I don't hold it against her. You know, life is not fair. It is not fair The thing is, the crap that you'll take from some people and never hold it against them.
And
And
another
the
person.
merest slight from a very good person, and maybe a better person,
You never
you hold
forgive
on
them.
to like a grudge that you keep rubbing raw, lest the wounds, heal.
Never forgive them for
That's
their
right.
whole life.
It's just not fair. Life is not fair.
When you think about some of what you say about your David, that he could just drive you crazy, and yet you love him
That's
so.
right. That's right. I mean, nobody in the world has the power to wound me the way David has. I'll wait 5 minutes till those kids grow up.
That's right. Or to please you either, I think, in the same way.
Yes, that's true. Look, what he got me since that St. Valentine's Day.
Very nice.
It's the first time I can remember him ever giving me flowers.
That's very sweet, isn't it?
I'm trying to think whether he ever brought me flowers, but certainly for Valentine's Day. Because, you see, this is what being a lawyer, you asked me earlier, are there any bad things about being a lawyer? The bad thing about being a lawyer is that he brought the identical thing for Teresa yesterday. Could he walk in and bring one for Teresa without giving me something?
I love that.
I mean, that's what it is being a lawyer. That crass, cold
eye.
That examines the situation and,
Take off the rose-colored glasses.
That's right.
And put on gray ones.
It's
almost.
condensation,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amusing, though.
Yeah. Now, who in the hell is ever going to listen to this? Lee Stimmel once said that if we would do this, he would have it all typed up. And I think what he was after was all the anecdotal stuff, because, I have been incident-prone in my lifetime.
Yes.
And,
well, for starters, who will listen to this 1,000 years from now? Your sons?
maybe my grandsons. Yeah.
Your sons? Your
I would
grandsons.
listen to it if I had my grandmother's reminiscences.
I would think.
I would like to know about my grandmother. I really would. I wish I didn't speak Yiddish enough to know how to ask questions to begin with, nor did I didn't understand the refinements in Yiddish because once I began going to public school, my father insisted on English being spoken at home. And my grandmother used to rail at me and say, "Du redst mit zerbrochener Zähne. You speak with broken teeth."
Did she live with you
No.
when she was an older lady?
No.
No, not ever.
For one thing, we lived in Mineola. I was already in California when she died.
This is your mom's mom?
Yeah. Well, my father's mother died when he was 5 years old.
That's right, you
Yeah.
told me that.
I never knew anybody from my father's family because he never acknowledged sisters or brothers. But I do remember the night that his father died. We were living in Bergen Street in a brownstone. I remember it very well because Leah was born there. Or Leah was a baby there. She used to have, used to turn blue. And my father, in the wintertime, from that house used to take us for sleigh rides. My father was sitting in the front room and he was crying. And my mother told me that his father had died. He just heard that his father had died.
They were still in Europe, the father?
Yeah.
Did he ever go back at all to visit?
No.
Nor did your mother until
No.
she never did?
Oh, my mother was scheduled to go back to Romania on the last trip to Israel, which I took. I promised her that when I was finished with law school, I would take her to Israel again. Actually, she took me. She paid for it, because where the hell would I get money, not even having a job yet? Right. So before I would take a job, I would go to Israel with her. She thought I was going to stay with her for 6 months, and when she found out it was just a 4 or 5 week trip, she was furious. But my mother got very, very ill in Israel, and remember I was trying to find Sylvia Brucan's address. He used to be the ambassador from Romania to the United Nations, and he worked at the center for several years. He was on our staff as a visiting fellow. And Brucan said he would meet us at the airport and he would drive us to Ush when my mother was born. And could I please bring him a tire for his car? And My mother got so ill when we were in Jerusalem that I sat wondering one day watching her whether I should have her buried in Jerusalem.
Something she ate or
No,
flu?
I think it was just, we traveled there for Passover, and we were sitting in the first row, and they began feeding people from the last row. Like an idiot, I didn't say, look, this is she's old and she can't wait. And the travel, it was a non-stop flight to Tel Aviv, and I just think it was just too hard on her. And then the very next day, we went to our first Passover meal, and they were very strict, and they wouldn't allow any eating until the ceremony was over, and it was all sung out. She got just too weak. And so I canceled the trip to Romania, but I'm very sorry for her today. And I took her to Lucy's house in Rome, where, I don't know, my mother began to remember Romanian words. It was after I unfroze my mother's block about learning. And then she began to use words like bonjour and merci, because there was a lot of French in Romanian words. I don't know how she and Lucy's housekeeper, Giovanna, spoke only Italian. My mother spoke no language. They got along fantastically well. And we stayed at Lucy's house for a good 10 days. She slept around the clock, and she was fine. And then afterwards we went to Santiago, and she was flirtatious. My God, she was cute. She was really cute.
Lucy lived in Rome for how long?
22 years.
Goodness.
And I was there after, let's see, I went for the first time in 61, and she left in 55. So I guess after about 6 years. That's when they thought I had a brain tumor, and she sent me a ticket to come to Rome. And,
Michelle was dead by then?
yeah, he'd been dead for 2 years. No, 61, no, he'd been dead
7 years?
7 years. Then I went to almost every other year, sometimes every year.
And what would you do? Spend a couple weeks, or?
So mostly, sometimes a few weeks, and sometimes the whole summer.
Oh God, how wonderful! The boys would come with you?
No, I went to camp. She never invited them. And no, I know Rome pretty well. I think I would remember it if I went back. I often when I think about should I take the boys to Rome, I get terribly frightened. How will I get around, because there's so many cars now. And I walked. In those days, I walked. It's a small city. It's like San Francisco. It's quite small. And I didn't walk all over Rome, but I walked all around the heart of it. So,
Which would be like walking around downtown San Francisco?
well, it would be like walking from the Embarcadero up to maybe Noe Valley, crisscross all the different places.
Did Lucy live in, you said she lived in this very fancy, the apartment that you showed me in the magazine?
The first time she lived in Piazza Altiera, which was an old palace, and with a cobblestone in the courtyard. You could always imagine the horses coming in a big, big courtyard with the cobblestones. Then she moved to the Piazza Cenci, which was built for Beatrice Cenci, and she had the top 3 floors of this palazzo. It was in the old ghetto section.
This is the one you showed me the pictures of?
Yeah. It was a couple of blocks away from the Roman Forum, and from the Teatro Marcello, and from the big synagogue. It was in